Good to be here. That's not the lesson for tonight, okay? We're certainly not going to be able to cover that many chapters in one Wednesday night. But we are going to try to tackle chapter 11. So if you'll turn there, 1 Samuel chapter 11 tonight. 1 Samuel chapter 11. Saul has already been ordained to be king over Israel. That was in a private ceremony. That was something privately that Samuel took him aside and did. And then in our last chapter, chapter 10, God gave Saul 3 different signs that was to validate, that was to prove that the word of God that had come through Samuel was the real deal. Right? This wasn't just something that Samuel did. This was something that was ordained of the Lord. And so 3 signs are given to Saul, and we were able to talk about those last week. Saul has been declared then among the people to be king. Chapter 10 kind of ends a little weird. Saul just kind of goes home. And I suppose that's fitting. It is weird, but there hasn't been a kingdom in Israel before. Like there's no royal palace to go to. There's no bureaucracy to kind of assemble yet. All of that stuff hasn't happened. Saul just kind of goes home, and he has a loyal following. And there's some that aren't yet ready to proclaim their loyalty. That's what we see there at the end of chapter 10. But when you get to the end and you begin chapter number 11. Saul has gone home, but he's been declared to be king. And chapter number 11 is going to give us a story where Saul is really, for the first time, able to assert himself to the forefront, to assert himself as king and really gather people to his cause. Okay, so Saul is really going to turn it on here in chapter number 11. And he's going to gain the respect. He's going to gain the admiration, and he's going to gain the following, even of some maybe that hadn't before. We don't want to make the mistake of thinking, because we get to the end of the story and we know that Saul's story doesn't end great, but you don't want to mistakenly think that, well, everything Saul ever did was miserable and worthless. That's not true. We're going to be able to see that tonight. Number 1, we're going to get into chapter 11, but number 1, let's talk about Jabesh threatened. Okay, Jabesh threatened. 1 Samuel chapter 11, verse 1, it says, Then Nahash the Ammonite came up and encamped against Jabesh Gilead. And all the men of Jabesh said unto Nahash, Make a covenant with us, and we will serve thee. So these Ammonites, here in verse number 1, encamp around the city of Jabesh. It's called Jabesh Gilead. That's basically the town of Jabesh in the region of Gilead. And it says there that they encamp against it. And basically, in old language, that means you either surrender or we're going to attack you. When you encamp around, or you siege someone, or you encircle someone, that is basically you're telling them that they need to surrender or you're going to attack and you're going to destroy them. Now, it tells us here that it was Nahash, and he was an Ammonite. Now, who are the Ammonites? It's something we haven't much discussed, but according to the Bible, in the book of Genesis chapter 19, the Ammonites are the descendants of Lot, right? So Abraham had a nephew named Lot, and we're familiar with Lot when he comes in with the story of Sodom and Gomorrah. But Lot has a couple of children, Moab, and then there's another son that becomes the father of the Ammonites. So the Moabites and the Ammonites are the descendants of Lot. So they're not exactly cousins, but they're somewhat distant relations. They are the descendants of Abraham, or of Lot, Lot's brother, or excuse me, Abraham's brother through Lot. So they're kind of distant cousins, right? Second cousins, third cousins, however many numbers you want to work it down. They're somewhat close in lineage to Abraham and Lot. Now, in the book of Deuteronomy chapter 2, the Ammonites were going to become a thorn in the side of Israel. And yet God would not allow the children of Israel to just utterly destroy them and wipe them out, right? When Israel leaves Egypt and they make their journey toward the land of promise, notice what the Bible says here, Deuteronomy chapter 2 and verse 19. Deuteronomy 2 verse 19, it says, "And when thou comest nigh over against the children of Ammon, distress them not, nor meddle with them, for I will not give thee of the land of the children of Ammon any possession, because I have given it unto the children of Lot for a possession." So when you come through and you make your way to the land of promise, don't mess with the Ammonites, okay? That's not your land. I didn't give you that land, and that land's been given to Lot for an inheritance. So don't meddle with these people. Just pass on. Don't disregard them. Don't worry about them. And yet, we learn from Deuteronomy chapter 23, that the Ammonites were a nuisance. They were obnoxious. They would not help at all. Notice Deuteronomy 23. Deuteronomy chapter 23, verse 3, it says, "An Ammonite or Moabite shall not enter into the congregation of the Lord. Even to their 10th generation shall they not enter into the congregation of the Lord forever. Because they met you not with bread and with water in the way when you came forth out of Egypt, and because they hired against thee Balaam the son of Beor of Pethor of Mesopotamia to curse thee." They might be distant relations, but they're not friends. And they were not going to be a help, and they were not going to be an assistance, and they actually proved that. They proved that as Israel made their journey on the way to the land of promise. They found no help, no assistance from the Moabites or the Ammonites. In fact, the Ammonites were a very wicked people. The Bible tells us about gods named Molech and Milcom. And these would have been gods that the Ammonites would have worshipped. They were not only rebellious people, they were a brutal people. In the book of Amos chapter 1, it talks about 3 transgressions, or for 4, the Lord would judge the Ammonites, and it mentions their brutality, the way that they treated women who were with child, just a brutal group of people. They were terrorizers of Israel. If you were to look at a map, and if you have a series of maps in your Bible, and if you were to go to the one that actually deals with Old Testament history, and you were to look at the ones that deal with Israel as a nation assembled in the land of promise, you'll see off to the east, and maybe just south, was the region of Ammon. And right there toward the east side of the Jordan River, there was a place called Jabesh. Okay, Jabesh was in the region of Gilead. And according to our text in 1 Samuel chapter 11, the Ammonites come and they encamp against that city. And that kind of sets the scene for what we're going to talk about tonight. Chapter 11, verse number 1, Nahash, the Ammonite, encamps against Jabesh Gilead. So they're still a nuisance, okay? They're pagan, idolatrous, brutal, terroristic Ammonites have now encamped against Jabesh Gilead. Now the men of Jabesh, according to verse number 1, they say, "Make a covenant with us and we will serve thee." Now that's kind of given up before you've even fought, right? When the people of Jabesh come out and say, "Make a covenant with us, we will serve," like they're ready to give up, right? We just promise not to kill us, make a covenant with us or an agreement with us, and we'll serve you. Right? There's almost no resistance there in that at all. Let's keep going with our story here. Verse number 2. 1 Samuel 11, verse 2. "And Nahash the Ammonite answered them, On this condition will I make a covenant with you, that I may thrust out all your right eyes and lay it for a reproach upon all Israel." So when the men of Jabesh Gilead say, "Hey, we don't want to fight. You know, can we just come to terms? We'll surrender. We'll serve you. You know, just will you make an agreement with us?" And Nahash, the Ammonites, their response is this: "Sure, here's the terms of your surrender. All of you men have to, we're going to gouge out your right eyes. We're going to make you a reproach in Israel. That kind of speaks to the brutality of these people, and that would be humiliating. Humiliating for two reasons, right, for the children of Israel. First of all, just the physical aspect of that. These people would now bear a mark on their body that they had surrendered, right? They would see, you would just be able to see at their face, and that's humiliating. That would just be degrading, demoralizing. It would also render them, most commentators will also mention, renders them powerless to resist even if they wanted to in the future. And the idea was this, right? The right eye is kind of symbolic there of power, but also, most people are right-handed. That's not a new thing. It's always been that way. And the picture there that most of them paint is that with the left hand you would hold the shield, and with the right hand you would hold the sword. Therefore, then your right eye becomes the one that would be dominant in battle. This one held, the shield held up. You would need your right eye to focus in on battle. You're giving up. You're giving up any resistance. You are settling for a demoralizing physical deformity, gouging out your eye, and basically in a promise also to never resist or never revolt. Those are the terms. You want to give up? Fine, we'll accept it. But everyone there in verse number 2, thrust out all your right eyes and lay it for a reproach upon all Israel. Well, here's their response. And the elders of Jabesh said unto him, give us 7 days respite, that we may send messengers unto all the coasts of Israel, and then, if there be no man to save us, we will come out to thee. They know they need help. The terms here aren't something that they want to readily agree to. They were pretty well just ready to lay down and let the Ammonites have their way, right? Let's make a covenant and we'll serve you. Okay, well, everyone thrust out your right eyes. Well, maybe we should ask for help. Tell you what, give us 7 days and we'll try to find someone to help us. And if we can't find someone to help us, then we will come out to thee. Now, it appears that the Ammonites agree to this. Now, why you would do that, I'm not actually sure. The only thing that it seems to indicate is that the Ammonites didn't at all feel threatened. Maybe they didn't feel that anybody was going to come to their aid. Fine, take all the time that you want. Take a week, take 2 weeks, take all the time that you need. Nobody's going to save you. Nobody's going to help you. And that's kind of the scene being set before us here, this attack or this encampment of Jabesh Gilead. All right, number 2, let's talk about Saul's response. Saul's response. Verse number 4, it says, then came the messengers to Gibeah of Saul. Now, why does it say Gibeah of Saul? Well, according to verse 26 of the previous chapter, it says Saul also went home to Gibeah. Gibeah is where Saul lives. There's no, Jerusalem's not a capital yet. That's not going to become a capital until a couple of years after David becomes king. There's no capital city. There's just, this is the king and this is where he lives. So verse number 4, the messengers came to Gibeah of Saul, and they told the tidings in the ears of the people, and all the people lifted up their voices and wept. When they hear what's going to happen, everybody weeps. Well, I get that, and that's probably an appropriate response to some extent, but they came looking for help, right? And everybody's weeping, but it doesn't look like anybody's yet jumping up to, no, we'll come and help. That doesn't happen yet. But then in verse number 5, and behold, Saul came after the herd out of the field and said, what aileth the people that they weep? And they told him the tidings of the men of Jabesh. Saul's been out working. Saul has been out in the fields and been out with the herds, and yet he hears the commotion. What in the world's going on? Why is everybody crying? Why is everybody weeping? And they tell Saul the story. They tell him what has happened in Jabesh Gilead. And in verse number 6, the Spirit of God came upon Saul when he heard those tidings, and his anger was kindled greatly. We talked about that last week when it speaks about the Spirit of God coming upon Saul, coming upon him to ready him, to equip him. You know, the Lord does direct. The Lord sets up kings and he removes kings, and he's fully within his right to, when he sets up a king, to equip him and empower him and enable him to lead. It's not just, no, Saul is not what you would really call a spiritual man. That doesn't mean that God can't equip him with good leadership traits and leadership qualities. And it tells us that the Spirit of God came upon him when he heard those things. And he got angry, okay? This is, there's sometimes that there is a necessary indignation, right? That whole concept of being angry and sinning not. There is an indignation here in Saul when he hears what is going on. These are now his people, right? Maybe some followed him right off. Maybe some didn't follow him right off. But these are his people now. He's the king over Israel. And so in verse number 7, he's going to give them a little object lesson. It says this in verse 7. He took a yoke of oxen, and he hewed them in pieces, and he sent them throughout the coasts of Israel by the hands of messengers, saying, Whosoever cometh not forth after Saul and after Samuel, so shall it be done unto his oxen. And the fear of the Lord fell upon the people, and they came out with one consent. Now, Saul means business, right? When Saul hears the commotion, when Saul hears about what's going on, first of all, it makes him mad. One of the reasons it makes him mad, okay, where's everybody at? These are our people, and they've been attacked, and they need help. Let's muster the troops. Let's gather people together. Let's get everyone to go and help. And he does so by an object lesson. He actually takes some oxen and he starts cutting them into pieces, and he sends those pieces of that ox all throughout the land of Israel, and basically tells the tribes, you're either with me or against me. You're with me? Come on, let's go fight. If you're against me, we're going to do this same thing to your oxen. It's basically, it's time to assemble. It's time to gather the troops. Not joining is not an option. Right? This is Saul's going to draft a handful of people into some military service here. It's time to go into war and to fight for our brethren. Now, it's interesting the way that he did this, right? You and I may not have done it this way, but this is the way that Saul felt maybe it would be most effective to get people's attentions and to get them to enlist and to get them to sign up and to get them to join. By threat. Right, however you feel about that, right, wrong, or indifferent, that's how Saul felt that he was going to get the most people's attention, by threatening them. You either come and help, or there'll be consequences. But I think of, I was reading some this week, one named Guzik said, when the cause is right and the need is desperate, it is wrong to do nothing. When the cause is right and the need is desperate, it's wrong to do nothing. And isn't that what David found? And we'll get to that story eventually, but when David came out and saw his brothers to kind of report back to Jesse all that was going on, and then David hears this Philistine giant mocking the tribes of Israel, mocking the God of Israel, and he looked around and are you guys seriously letting him do this? Is there not a cause? David looked around, and the fact that no one had stood up to this giant when he was mocking God and mocking Israel, David was just flabbergasted. Isn't there a cause? Somebody should have stood up by now and tried to do something about this guy. He looked and was able to see, the fact that nobody's doing nothing, it didn't sit well with him. And it apparently doesn't seem like it's going to sit well with Saul if people just sit around and don't do anything. When the tribes of Israel had wandered through the wilderness and they came to the doorstep of Canaan, and the Bible tells us in Numbers chapter 32 about a couple of tribes, 2.5 tribes that saw the east side of Jordan and saw some of the land that was there, and that it was good, it was going to be good for their cattle, and they came to Moses with a request. Hey, I know we kind of like this land over here. Would you give us land on the east side of Jordan? And Moses looked at him, and I'm not sure if it was in the way that they asked, or Moses was just able to deduce that it sounds like these guys are, it sounds like these guys have made their decision and they're kind of done. And Moses got angry. Numbers chapter 32, he says, "Shall your brethren go to war, and shall ye sit here?" Moses didn't accept that. Moses said, "Yes, you can have the land that is on the east side of Jordan, but you will go over Jordan, you will help your brethren, you will help the other tribes defeat the enemy and take this land and occupy this land. And if you don't go over, you've sinned against the Lord, and be sure your sin will find you out." I think sometimes we use that verse, right? I think we're pretty well familiar with that phrase. I think it gets maybe used a lot, right? Well, be careful about sinning because your sin will find you out. The context of that statement by Moses was to a handful of tribes being warned that if you don't do what you're supposed to do, you're in trouble. And so it seems that there are some contexts here in the Old Testament where these leaders, Moses, Saul, David, inaction is not acceptable, right? You don't just get to stand on the side. And we're Christians, and we have a cause, and there's something to do in the service of the Lord, and we need to be active in His service. Okay? There's no reserve Christians. This isn't, a sport where there's sidelines. It's a battle, so there's front lines, and everyone is responsible to be involved in the good fight of faith. Okay? In action, we're not just hanging out. Christians aren't just people that, we're saved and I guess we'll just kind of coast until the rapture. There's stuff to do. There's service to be involved in. And Saul appears to be real angry at the thought of people not stepping up and joining. You don't want to join? Okay, that's your call, but your cattle are gone, your oxen are gone. And that's kind of the object lesson that he gives them there. Verse number 8. Or let's finish verse number 7. It says, "The fear of the Lord fell upon the people, and they came out with one consent." Now, the fear of the Lord fell upon them. I would like to think that out of the goodness of their hearts and their love for their brethren, that's why they joined. Maybe it was a threat from a king. Who knows? But the end result is the same, okay? Listen, whatever it takes to motivate you to get involved, right? Let me threaten you what happens if you don't. Let me encourage you through the love and compassion of your heart to do it. Whatever it takes, right? Saul's got them. They're involved. And with one voice and with one consent, they come out. So that part's settled. Verse number 8. "And when he numbered them in Bezek, the children of Israel were 300,000. And the men of Judah, 30,000. So 330,000. And it says in verse 9 that they said unto the messengers that came, Thus shall ye say unto the men of Jabesh Gilead, Tomorrow, by that time the sun be hot, ye shall have help. And the messengers came and showed it to the men of Jabesh, and they were glad. You tell them we're coming. 330,000 strong, available. You go and tell them by tomorrow, help is on the way. Help is on the way. It's good that it says there at the end of verse number 9 that they were glad. It's good to know that you have help. It's good to have hope, right? These men in verse number 1, the people of Jabesh Gilead, were basically ready to just call it quits there, right? You name the terms and we'll serve thee. Well, the terms that they gave in verse 2 weren't great, and kind of in a desperate plea, verse number 3, okay, just give us some time. Maybe we can find somebody to help us. Well, guess who they found? There's a king in Israel now. And he assembles the troops and tells them, you tell them tomorrow we're coming. And you've got help, and help is on the way. And they were glad. Verse number 10, Therefore the men of Jabesh said, Tomorrow we will come out unto you, and ye shall do with us all that seemeth good unto you. Now that's kind of a little clever ambiguity, right? When messengers come back to the people of Jabesh Gilead, they send out word, the Ammonites had encamped around them, And so when the word comes, hey, tomorrow help will be here. By the time the sun's burning hot in the sky, help will be here. So those men of Jabesh Gilead send back word out to the Ammonites, okay, give us till tomorrow. Tomorrow will come out, right? It's easy. It's good to be confident when you have hope, right? When you know help is coming, it gives you kind of a more of a confidence there. And it was a little ambiguous. They didn't say what they were coming out with. They just said, hey, we'll come out tomorrow. Verse 11, and it was so on the morrow that Saul put the people in 3 companies, and they came into the midst of the host in the morning watch, and slew the Ammonites until the heat of the day. And it came to pass that they which remained were scattered, so that 2 of them were not left together. That's how great the victory was. Help comes, and the battle is won. Saul takes the troops, he divides them. Saul's got some strategy about him. He's taking his men, he's got them into 3 different groups, and they attack. And the victory is so overwhelming that the Ammonites, they flee. And the victory is so great that of those that flee, there's not enough of them to there's no pockets of them. It's just every man running, scattered. There's not even 2 of them that are left, according to verse 11, together. A great victory is won here. A great battle is won here. And Saul, physically, seems like the one that led the charge. Seems like he's the one that's gathered the troops, that's led them in. He's made everyone gather together. He's not taken no for an answer, and he's going to go save his people and keep them from being destroyed. All right, lastly, number 3, let's talk about the aftermath. Verse number 12, and the people said unto Samuel, who is he that said, shall Saul reign over us? Bring them in, that we may put them to death. When the dust settles, there is a push now. You remember what happened at the end of chapter 10? We read that verse at the end where it says, but the children of Belial said, how shall this man save us? And they despised him. This victory is so great that there's no doubt now. Yeah, Saul's the man. Saul is our king. Saul has led us in this great battle. And there's immediately a response when that dust settles, like, where were those guys that weren't going to bow to Saul? Where were those guys that said, shall Saul reign over us? Let's get all the rebels now. Let's get all of them together, and we're just going to execute them right here. They're ready at the moment of victory to expose anybody that wasn't loyal from the beginning. But in verse 13 it says, Saul said, there shall not a man be put to death this day, for today the Lord hath wrought salvation in Israel. That's a very wise response from King Saul. First of all, he gives the Lord credit. Now you and I have read this story, and you and I know physically with the actual battle, the credit probably belongs to Saul. He's the one that gathered the troops, that had the strategy, that led them toward the battle. Saul basically made all of this happen, right? Who does Saul give the credit to, though? This day, in verse 13, for today the Lord hath wrought salvation in Israel. That's really smart. Saul made all this happen, and yet he's willing to, you know what? The Lord gave us victory today. The Lord wrought a great salvation in Israel. That's important, right? It's important to make sure the crown goes on the right head. We read, on Sunday, we mentioned the passage of Scripture where the Israelites were fighting the Amalekites, and Moses was raising his hands, and when he raised his hands, they were able to have victory, and when his hands were lowered, they were losing. So Aaron and Hur stayed up his hands so that the battle could be won. You say, well, who gets the credit for that? Well, Moses seems to be the focal point of the story there, and yet what does it say? Moses built an altar and named it Jehovah Nissi, the Lord our banner. Moses wanted to make sure that when that battle was done, the Lord got the credit for it. And Saul seems to do the same here. We're not killing anybody. Maybe there were some that really needed to see something in Saul. You know what? It looks like Saul has proven himself. Saul did not want to give in to the division, right? That's wise. That is wise for leaders. And this part, maybe there is a hint of, political thought in it, right? It's wise for leaders to try to keep division at a minimum if they can. I don't think that sounds, too far-fetched to think that, a good leader should not just thrive on exploiting division all the time. When these men come and say, hey, where were those rebels that weren't loyal from the beginning? We'll just take them out right now. Saul's like, no, stop that. And wouldn't let that happen. That's wise. That's good. That's good on him for doing that. Satan works that way. If he can't win the battle from the outside, he'd sure like to win the battle from the inside. Don't give in to that stuff. Don't let that stuff happen. Verse 14, Samuel sees a golden opportunity here. Now, you and I both know how the last chapter ended. There's some divided loyalties. Some people follow Saul, some people didn't. But Saul has done something really good here. Saul has done something really wise, something really courageous, something really admirable. And Samuel is going to use that to his advantage. Verse 14, then said Samuel to the people, come and let us go to Gilgal and renew the kingdom there. Right? This is the best time to have a rally. This is the best time to get all the people back together again, right? Last time, Saul was a nobody. Nobody really knew who Saul was. We know that he looked the part. He's head and shoulders above everyone else. Saul looks like the real deal. But there was divided loyalties. Now, there's not going to be any divided loyalties now, right? Saul has stepped up to the task. That's always encouraging, right? When we elect our leaders. We do so every 4 years, 6 for Senate, all that stuff. But isn't it encouraging, right? When you elect new leadership and at the first opportunity or the first controversy, they step up to the job and they do a good job. That's what Saul has done here, right? The first controversy, the first thing that steps up or the first thing that comes up when he's been named king, he does a great job. Whatever the end result is going to be, whatever you know about Saul in the future, if this is just how you were to start with him, he's off to a great start. This is great. He did the right thing. And he's given God the credit for it. And Samuel says, let's get a rally together. Let's renew the kingdom there. And it says in verse 15, all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. Now, understand the language there. Saul was already king. He's already been ordained. He's actually already been announced. But now there's a different aspect of it, right? It seems like there's a full-scale recognition of Saul like there wasn't last time. And there they sacrificed sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord. And there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. Saul has proven himself, right? He's 1 for 1. He did a great job here in this passage. And he gave God the credit, and he did not succumb to division. He didn't give in to those that would try to divide anymore. He has rescued some of his people. This episode at Jabesh Gilead really started off with bad thoughts, like people that were ready to give up. The threat that came from the Ammonites was brutal, and it was demoralizing. And yet at the end, you have a people now that have seen something in Saul. He stood up for his people. He rescued his people. He demanded others do the same. And he kind of looks like he's done some really, really good things here in this passage. Okay, so we're going to close there with the end of chapter 11. We're not going to try to cover any more tonight. But this is good. This is a really good way to end the first episode after Saul has been declared king. The last chapter ends, and nobody knows about Saul yet. And Saul's gone back home, and there's some that are loyal to him, and there's some that are not. This is how you prove it to people, right? This is how you make believers out of people. And Saul has proven himself, and Samuel takes this opportunity. They make sacrifices, peace offerings, and again, Saul is declared and crowned king. All right. Let's all stand together tonight. Let's have a word of prayer.